Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Real World Projects video. You guys seem to really like this series aside from the typical educational tutorials I make, so I will continue to make these every month. Today's video is going to be on Premiere FX or PRFX, this massive, super powerful Premiere Pro extension I programmed. Essentially, this extension has thousands, up to 10,000 presets built into it, and there's a ton of challenges over the approximately year and a half or so it took to develop this. So today I'm going to be going over all the things from the duration this took, some of the big hurdles with such a big project, such a large Premiere extension, and a lot more. Before we get started, I do want to remind you down below, hit subscribe and the bell icon to be notified of new videos coming out twice weekly in the channel, and down in the description you can follow us on GitHub for coding updates as well as Instagram for other live updates. If you haven't already joined our Discord, make sure you join to get help with scripting, extensions, plugins, submit tutorial ideas, hang out with awesome members, and help others out. If you want to help support us on YouTube and get cool perks at the same time, you can follow us in the description by becoming a member or supporter, and this describes all of the perks here that you can get for each of the perk levels. And also down in the description, check out the links to AE Scripts, Gumroad, and Adobe Exchange to see some other cool stuff I make. Now, of course, the link for this will also be in the description, which is another very cool thing that I've made. And I've been waiting to talk about this honestly for a long time. And to be exact, the first evidence or first commit that I ever made for this project was on March 10th, 2021. It is now October of the year after, so it's been well over a year and a half since we first started working on this. There has been so much done, so much learned, and I'm going to be going over all of that now. Having a GitHub repo just like this is super cool because you can actually look back at the progress you've made, how long you've been working on stuff, and when you're all done, you can see how much different things look. So this is a very early version of the README file, just a bunch of stuff that I had been noting to myself, and you can see the UI used to look a lot different, a lot more cramped together, not well designed, and that stuff changed much over time. So again, this project started in March of 2021, working here with Phantasma, a very awesome author on VideoHive, who has created a ton of popular things for DaVinci Resolve, Final Cut, and Premiere. If you're familiar with Cinepunch, and things like that is what he has created. Super popular product, and now we have, basically, he reached out to me to basically want to integrate a lot of the stuff he created into an easy to use extension, because usually with these type of Premiere projects or even the After Effects ones where people want a sort of motion bro, where they have hundreds, thousands of different presets in different folders, different subfolders, different packs, different styles, usually you'll have to import an existing project into your Premiere project. Then you go in, you find the project you want, you drag it in, then you adjust all the properties and stuff that you wanted. But with Premiere FX, the whole goal was to take that workflow and make it super simple so that you can simply double click on a preset and then it's going to do that whole process for you. It's going to know exactly what time you want to add it on. It's going to apply any scaling or things like that that are required, and it's going to apply the audio. And with that, you can very quickly obviously import footage and deal with all of that. This basically just takes out the manual process of everything you normally would have to do with those existing kinds of Premiere or After Effects presets on websites. Because this does, of course, tons of different things. Not only are we dealing with audio, we're making sure that it's pasting on the correct tracks, we're making sure everything is scaled appropriately so the effects appear appropriate, and a whole bunch of other background stuff for all of these presets. And when I say all of these presets, it's because there are a lot. Now, one way I can kind of search for the amount in here is to search for JPEG images, but this just covers the video portions. So one thing I can do to search how many approximate files there are is search for the JPEGs, because these are what are the previews for everything, including a lot of the audio in this as well. And what that reveals is there's just under 7,500 presets. Now, I've never worked on something that massive, and I was thinking, number one, how are we going to fit all of these files into an extension? It's going to be tons of gigabytes. And number two is, what kind of problems and organizational issues is this going to cause? Originally, we already knew that there was going to be 12 of these total packs. Um, but at first, we just started with one of them to work on the general extension itself. So for the vast majority of the development time of this extension, we were just working with this first FX Master Studio pack. But from the beginning, I knew there was going to be these 12 folders with tons of presets. And the first thing I had to do was one, figure out how to automate the organization and preset creation of all of these thousands of presets. And number two was to figure out how I was going to reduce the file size and maintain a good quality result anyway. So number one on my list was the first thing I worked on, and that's the Phantasma extension exporter script I created. It's a little around 700 lines of code, which seems insane, but what this will physically do is take a project he sends me, which has an entire category of all of this. It will have, say, maybe the first one he gives me is Transition Master. It will have all these subfolders inside of the Premiere project, and essentially what this script does is it goes in and it scrapes out all the stuff you need. It creates a folder organized for each of the presets, each of the packs and the subfolders and all that structure. It creates a JPEG preview so that when you're browsing through here, you have these nice little previews to show you this is what it's going to look like when you play it. As well, we also have MP4 previews to go alongside when you actually hover over them, and that's what's going to play. And that was the main process, was figuring out how to automate that, as well as the process of exporting the Premiere project files. Just to give you some context, I'm going to open up one of these sort of style packs. So with the extension itself, there are these sort of master folders, I call them. There's FX Master, Transition Master, Color Master, Looks and Effects, Camera Motion, Credits Master. Each of these with the express goal of doing something different, obviously creating transitions easily, adding color correction easily, adding credits or text easily. Each of them has a specific purpose. So each of them came in this sort of big giant project. And when we go to the root level, have a look at the structure, all of them were structured the same. So I was able to make a script to automate the exportation. So each of these have sort of this master folder, then another subfolder, and then the name of the actual folder. From this point, the script goes in and automates all of this. It opens up each one of these sequences, takes a look at it. If it has, for example, if I'm doing a video export for the thumbnails, and I have this photographer.mov clip, which is offline right now, but it would do an export of an image and a video of that first off. And then we'd also do a project export. The reason we do a project export is because that's part of the re-importation flow. So what then it would then do is remove any footage and then save this and all of or any of the required materials that are associated with it, whether it be audio or additional layers or things like that. The reason we do this is because of one, some Premiere scripting limitations, and two, what I've seen other extensions do. So some of the limitations are essentially that we can import sequences and stuff from other projects, which is pretty much the main thing we want to do. So you can see here I've already imported, for example, this camera shake preset, and it imports all of its audio and the required elements, and it comes nicely in this pre-existing composition. Now normally the manual way you would do this before it was in an extension form is you would copy it, go into your other sequence, select the tracks you want to paste it on, and paste it. Obviously there would be some issues sometimes if you didn't do it correctly, so that's part of where the extension comes in handy, but this copy and paste process is actually what the extension had to do. There's no other options, mainly because if I right click this, there's this adjustment layer option that needs to be checked. If I was to simply recreate this layer setup, which is possible with the script inside of here, which was the original workflow, what would actually happen is the adjustment layer would not be selected. And with the adjustment layer not being selected, this just causes issues and allows us to have no image below. So it wouldn't apply the effect to your footage. The adjustment layer setting has to be checked. And because there is no way in scripting, whether it's 2020, 21, or 22, there's no way to do this via scripting, the copy and paste method was required because in this existing composition or sequence we imported, the adjustment layer is already checked, so the workflow had to be copy, paste. And that's exactly what we ended up doing. Inside the extension itself, there are bin folders with Mac and Windows copy and paste executables. These will essentially require special permissions, which is also a complicated part of this extension. That is, in the first setup, you have to enable some things in your system to make sure everything works appropriately. But these files get run. So first, the extension, once you click on a preset, it opens up this sequence, selects all the clips, runs this copy operation on your Mac or Windows. Then it goes back to the original composition, make sure all the timing and lined up stuff is there. Then it runs the paste operation. And this is basically the workflow. Other extensions have used similar workflows, and in order to use this Premiere specific project type of workflow, this is what's required. I have done some other projects where it's not necessarily Premiere Pro projects, which are the presets, but it's just video files or audio files. And for the video and audio file section of this extension, that's actually exactly what was done. Because they're just audio files, those can be imported into the project items, then pushed onto the timeline, no problem. But for these, which use actual Premiere project files, which have to be imported, and these very specific sequences, which have to be copied and pasted, this is the workflow that was required after probably, I'd say, 6 to 10 months of testing and failing at other methods. We did actually look at seamless transitions as well as a few other extensions to see how they were approximately doing it. And while they have a more custom hacky solution, ours is as well, but it still gets the job done in copy and pasting things. So as you can see, just off the bat, the presets and the copy and paste workflow for actually importing this stuff was crazy complicated. On top of that, this entire extension full of 7,500 presets, it needs to have a few other features. And just among other things that we've had to do, besides those basic simple first things we did, we had to do Envato registration, which when you first launch the extension, you can see will flash by really quick because I've already put in my stuff. But from there, you can launch the application and have access to all this. The two other big features were a favorites feature as well as a search feature. Now, the hard part about this is creating a sort of favorites structure. And the favorite structure, I'm not going to go into too much depth on, but basically it mirrors one-to-one these folder structures. So you have an array of 12 folders. Inside of one of the folders, you have, all of these subfolders, which have an array for each one of those. And the favorites, basically the favorite toggle for each of these presets is true or false. Whenever you click on one, it will remember that and write it to the file. So next time you come in, it will still be remembered as a favorite or a non-favorite. And then of course you can search or move up to all your favorites. A couple other cool things that I just added because they're useful features is a preview all feature, so you can preview all of these at once if you don't want to just see them in this upper preview section, as well as this nifty size bar. While the extension itself is very resizable, and that we spent a long time figuring out how to get that to look nice, you can also, of course, change the size of the previews. So no matter what your window setup is, if you have a different screen, if you have a tiny window for Premiere FX, we tried to make it applicable to be viewable by all. So those are the main basics that we spent maybe the first year deliberating on. For me, it was a lot of firsts, figuring out things in Premiere that I had never done before, I didn't even know were possible. Obviously, a lot of the hurdles I came across here were not possible, and I had to tell the client Phantasma that we got to take a 180, and I got to figure out some other way to do this process. But one of the best things about this project, being that it was so complicated and at times very frustrating to figure out these, in my opinion, never before figured out things, was that Phantasma, the guy who hired me for this project, was very understanding that he was doing something that had only been done a few times. A lot of these features actually had never been done, and he would compensate me for the extra work. And if we do want to talk about size, while this was uploaded on VideoHive, which has some limitations on sizing, before this, Phantasma had already been creating some of the largest ever seen products on Envato or VideoHive, so they had already known him as the kind of guy who was going to push that boundary, and this allowed us to get away with, well, the installer is around 7 to 8 gigs, but when unpacked, it's around 8.5 to 9 gigabytes. This is huge by most standards, but when you're getting 7,500 video, audio, transition, color correction presets, it's really not that bad. In fact, each preview file is approximately 25 kilobytes for the image and no more than about a megabyte for the video. We really crushed down the preview sizes to make sure they wouldn't take up too much space. As you can see here, I believe the resolution is less than 320 for the width. So we just mainly have this set up here with all of the presets in the tiniest formatting possible. The only thing we couldn't really get away with was reducing the size of the audio, because not only would we be changing it from a WAV to MP3, losing a bit of quality, we would have also be messing up all of the linkage that was already existing in these projects. I'm trying to think if there's anything else major besides the copy paste operations, the amount of presets, and the sizing issue. Those were the main hurdles that had to be figured out, as well as a whole bunch of little tiny things regarding Premiere. For example, in this project, I figured out how to do a undo group kind of deal with Premiere, to where you apply your preset and then you can hit Control Z just to undo everything with one click. That was something that I figured out 80% of the way, and it has a basic functioning version. There are of course other features that had to be figured out for this that I didn't mention, like having to figure out a undo type of thing where you can Control Z one time and undo all of the processes that the extension did. There's a whole bunch of little things like that for Premiere that I had never heard about or experimented with before. And we should also mention this extension had a bit of a scary release in terms of, this is my first time creating a product with a fully integrated API released that is for registration only. So this has had a version of the Envato API integrated so that after you added to your cart, bought now, and got your registration code, the registration code would work inside of the extension. But we did have some issues and had to make updates for a number of reasons. And these few reasons will be the last thing I kind of go over, but these are super important if you're ever going to release something huge like this. Because for so long, 4 months even, I was just focused on getting the size of the extension down, making sure it looks good, making sure all the presets and favorites and all that are working. But what I didn't think about was languages and registration. So the initial registration was kind of tricky, because what we did in order to test it was I basically bought one of my own products, grabbed that registration code, and set up the registration for our beta testing for this to think that it was like my product. So although it's called Premiere Pro FX, I used my product called CreditSmith. I used a code from that for our beta testing, so I could send this to a beta tester or Phantasma themselves and say, hey, use this beta code. It's only going to work for this version, but when we finally release it, here's what we have to do. And this is kind of the tricky part. In order to get the registration code on Envato, first the product has to be uploaded and approved by the VideoHive people. Once it's approved and stuff, you can then go to Add Cart, Buy Now. Inside of that section, which is like under your downloads or whatever, you can then download the files for the app as well as a text file which has the registration code. This means that until the product was both accepted and uploaded, we couldn't test any of the registration codes for Phantasma specifically. So basically the first issues we had as soon as we got it uploaded was that some people were having serious issues with the registration codes. Now, why was this happening? I had no idea. I had basically looked through this build.envato.com API, and most of this information was super helpful, but it turns out the Envato API code I had been using was this. I was using the version 1 API checker. This wasn't actually from this webpage. It was from somewhere in the Envato or VideoHive forums. And it was essentially a curl command you could type into command prompt or terminal, and it would give you information about the user or if their code they inputted was successful or real. And I thought this was going to work perfectly because in our testing, it actually had worked perfectly. But it comes to find out, basically, with this old Envato API link I was using, again, nothing related to this website, basically what it was doing was whenever you would activate a registration code, like our beta registration code, for example, it would work once. Then it would stop working anywhere from an hour to like a day. So this was something we never had to deal with because we'd put in the code once, our app would remember it, and we wouldn't have to deal with that. But what really happened was we were using an old API connection and getting bad responses basically. So what we did, we made sure we went through all of this and really figured out how all of this new version 3 of the API works. And I got a version with the API working that no matter how many times I sent the command, it would always give me the same response, unlike how it was set up before. So making sure your API is tested thoroughly and making sure you're using up-to-date links is super important before you release a huge product like this. The other thing I mentioned, I said language, but it wasn't necessarily related to the language. But the language did help me break it down because you basically, I would recommend having 2 versions ready for upload when you're doing a huge release like this. The final version that you think is all good to go, no debugging stuff involved, no alerts, nothing like that. And then a version with the same functionality with some kind of debugging. Usually if you write this debugging stuff to a file on the desktop or in a specific documents folder, that's best. With this project, we saved it in the same location as the favorites and the preferences, which were just indicators of what kind of things to display in the UI. And I basically would have all of these lines written out to tell me, here's what's going on, here are the variable values. And if a user sent us an email that they had bought the product and couldn't connect or couldn't do any of this, I would say, hey, please send me the debug file located in this folder. Now, unfortunately, you want to be super specific when you do this because you don't want to have too much back and forth with these clients that are having issues, which I have ended up having to do. I had debug all over the code, but there's so much code and I actually hadn't put debugs in the right place to identify where the problem was happening with some of these users. It turned out to be something actually really silly in the end, like literally like a does not equal versus equals sign in some of the code was causing most of the issues. But if you have a debug version for your released product, make sure you comment or put these debug lines to write your code all over. You don't want to accidentally have to send multiple, especially when these are 9 gigabyte installer files. You don't want to have to send a ton of these for the user to download, update, hope that it's writing over all the files correctly, hoping they're factory resetting correctly, and all of this. So have a ready to go release version and a debug version, which just spits out all the information you could ever need to find out where code is stopping or what variables are wrong to make sure you solve any user issues as soon as they come out. So finally, after it's safe to say 1.5 to 2 years, we finally released this product and we've had to have several updates since then and continue to work on some debugging information. Because of the vast scale of this project and because of the amount of things I've learned from it, it's really been worth it despite all of the long nights and extra requests for payments and things like that. These kind of projects are super ambitious, and as long as the client is understanding that you're doing something that hasn't really been done much before, and there might be some hiccups along the way, might be some unforeseen costs, but you're gonna finally get this super cool suite, really, of products into one extension. It's super worth it. And that's basically the story of Premiere Pro FX, or as I call it, PRFX. Started in early 2021 and finally finished up just the other week, a 1.5 years later. It's been a super fun thing to work on, and I have some other cool projects, which this has really helped me learn some stuff during the process of to help me more easily put together other projects and scope out what is possible for other clients. If you guys enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button. Down below, hit subscribe and the bell icon to be notified of new videos coming out twice weekly in the channel. And down in the description, you can follow us on GitHub for coding updates, as well as check out the links to buy this awesome extension. Also, check out the link down there for Instagram for other live updates. If you're not already a member in our Discord server, make sure you come and join to help with scripting, extensions, plugins, submit tutorial ideas, and much more. And if you'd like to help support us on YouTube, you can do so in the description by becoming a member or supporter, which comes with cool perks like Discord status, badges, live streams, extra polls, and also check out the links down below to AE Scripts, Gumroad, and Adobe Exchange to see some other cool stuff I make. Thanks again for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time.